My story begins with a Jerusalem-born father and a Bethlehem-born mother, Christians. They fled Palestine in 1948. Like over 700,000 other Palestinians, the creation of Israel disrupted their lives. They were tormented by their exile and everything they lost. They were frustrated by the Palestinian image in the media. And I would hear them say over and over, "Why doesn't anyone ever tell the truth?" I wanted to know the truth, so I went there. I met my family, spoke to the experts, and spoke with the people. They wanted to tell me their stories, and I wanted to hear them. They simmered inside me for 16 years because I was afraid to take the risk. Today, I'm going to take the risk and tell you their stories.
You talk to Americans, they just say, you know, this is just crazy, it's just Jews hate Arabs and Arabs hate Jews, and it's just this visceral hatred, and they've been doing this since biblical times, and we're never going to solve it, and frankly I'm sick of the whole conflict and I don't want to see it on TV anymore. And I really understand that. I mean, I understand why it appears that way. But that's not what this conflict is about. And it's really quite simple to understand on the surface. This is a conflict between an occupying power and an occupied people that are denied rights by that occupying power.
It's as if the Palestinians woke up one day in their own free and independent land and decided, aha, the Israelis out there, we've got to kill them. The thing is, there's an occupation. The wall is being built on Palestinian land in order to protect the Israelis from the consequences of their own actions. The Israelis want an occupation with impunity. They want an occupation with full immunity. They want to be able to get away with anything that they do to the Palestinians, and then they want to blame the Palestinians for any response to the occupation.
In order to tell you this story, you need a bit of history.
Welcome to my class, Palestine 101. This is your Professor Iron Sheik. Now pay attention, pay very close attention, and you will learn. Trouble began before 1948, when Zionists founded the Israeli state. See, Zionism called for a Jewish homeland, but they picked Palestine as a land with no man. One major flaw with all of this, they forgot the indigenous populace. Native Arab, Muslims, and Christians. Didn't they notice that something was missing? They left Native Arabs all out of their view. Zionism's goals were heavily skewed. Newcomers settled up in the countryside, in separation just like apartheid. Jewish road schools and hospitals, but also paramilitary patrols. These are the seeds of 48, from colonial control to the Jewish state. It's not a mistake, oh, it's not a mistake. Life in exile, is that our fate? Life in exile, is that our fate? Life in exile, is that our fate? Fate, 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 fate. Look at the keys and the tables. You're doing a good job, class. Keep it up. See, they exiled us and stole our homes. Now we have our old keys and new poems. They turned us into refugees and uprooted us like an olive tree. Olive trees, olive trees. They exiled us and stole our homes. Now what we have are old keys and new poems. They turned us into refugees and uprooted us like an olive tree. Keyword home, olive trees. Keyword poem, olive trees. Now we're gonna talk about history. Here we go. Let's break it down. In 1917, the British gave away our nation with Lord Balfour's mother-freaking declaration. They had no right to give it away, but guess what? They did it anyway. And once again, the natives had no say. You know the British acted like they ruled the earth. The Israelis think that they got it by birth. Yeah, right, man. Who lived on this land? Who had to use force with their hands? I'm surprised at this. They should know better. They come on our land just like a settler. I mean, that word says it all. Some say it's not their choice, so that it's God's call. But to me, that's called manifest destiny. I thought that went out of style in the last century. Now we held captive to their public opinion. As a Palestinian, feel more like an Indian. Driven into reservations, living under occupation. As a shattered nation, a Western creation. What? Yeah, huh. Open your textbooks to page. They exiled us and stole our homes. Now what we have are old keys and new poems. They turned us into refugees and uprooted us like our olive trees. Keyword homes, olive trees. Israel and America's a sinking ship. If we don't change it, we're going down with it. They exiled us and stole our homes. Now what we have are old keys and new poems. They turned us into refugees and uprooted us like our olive trees. Class dismissed.
One day in 1948, The Israeli army came to my mother's house and told her there was going to be a war. For their protection, they must leave now. Take nothing. You'll be able to come back. My mother took one suitcase full of pictures she painted.
I treasured those pictures and I put them at the bottom of my suitcase, not knowing whether I'm going to come back to the house or not. And that's how come I took them with me, because they were my best friends.
They were never able to go back, and everything they owned was taken. The land, the homes, the bank accounts, the businesses, the orchards. She and my father moved to America, went to college, had children, made a new life for themselves. It would be a lifetime before my mother ever returned to see her family again. Are you ready, Mom?
Yes, Dad, I'm ready. I can hardly wait.
Okay.
Can we go now? I feel like I'm going to go back home, and I feel emotional.
How long has it been?
30 years.
30 years.
Yeah.
My mother was the only child of a divorced Christian family in the 1930s. A very difficult situation for her.
I lived with my uncle for a while, and then I lived with my father for a while. And I lived with my mother till I was 7 years old, and then I had to go to my father.
Her mother and father remarried. We never met her father's side of the family, but her mother's family was still living in Bethlehem in East Jerusalem. And that's where we were headed. This would be the first time we would meet many of my mother's stepbrothers and sisters.
That's my sister.
Mary, Jack, Flavia, Milad, Johnny, Brahim. It's important for anyone who knows nothing about the situation in the occupied territories in Israel to understand one thing. Everyone has an opinion, and they are very willing to share it. We set up the camera in Ben Yehuda Square, Jerusalem, open to Arabs and Israelis. In minutes, we were mobbed.
If you're talking about peace with the Palestinians, there's only a possibility if they really want it, they have to come and get it. I mean, we have been giving it to them and they've been throwing it away.
Everybody has a right to live in peace, but nobody has a right to kill other people, to take their property, or because they disagree with their opinion.
Of course not. Of course
Right.
not. I'm not
Have you been on the other side of the wall?
What?
Have you lived in some of the Arab villages?
There is no occupation, period. It doesn't exist. Define occupation. First of all, the wall was built for a couple reasons. We screwed up and they screwed up. The wall would not have been built if there wasn't the violence going on today, if they did not continually come in and attack us and blow up our children.
Have you lived in another village?
No, I
you
have
lived
not.
on the
Thank
other
God I
side of
haven't.
the wall?
You're right. No, I haven't.
Then you don't
why
know
did
how
why
it
did it get to that point? Right now, both Israel is butchering them and vice versa. It's gotten to the point where we have screwed up. Israel was founded improperly. It says Nefesh Yehudi, it's a Jewish soul, and we have not established the country that it should have been, and we have shot ourselves in the foot. Now we're in a position where we have no choice but to build a barrier and cause humanitarian problems.
Berlin didn't have to build a wall, and
We're not
walls
Berlin.
always
I don't
come
agree.
down.
I'm not looking at a democratic state. I'm looking at a
Right.
Jewish state.
Right, well,
They
right
are
now you gotta
attacking
do
us
damage
with their
control.
religion. They attack us with Islam by saying we are supposed to be out of here, we are infidels, we are horrible. Well, then you know what we have to do? Instead of fighting a political war, we have to fight a religious war. It's Judaism versus them, period, because that's the reality.
And
That is
instead
the
of doing-
reality.
And instead of doing to other people what they have done to you, you should do what you would want them to do to you.
Do you know what you're talking about?
My grandmother was
What-
Jewish, God rest her soul, and her family came from Russia. I know all about the Holocaust, and I know about the
But
difficulties.
he is saying concrete
My
things here.
husband
He
is
is saying things that
Palestinian,
make sense.
and I've lived over there for 7 months, and I tell you that I understand the frustration. It would drive anybody to do desperate things. I understand. I have been harassed myself.
It is senile. There's no logic behind their
But desperate
concern.
situations drive people to do desperate things.
They
you
were
put
offered.
somebody in
do
a
you know how
box,
much
and I
land
assure
was-
you,
how
they'll
many
try to
times
get
were
you.
they
children
offered?
hate, if you
How
told
many
them-
times were they offered?
They
land?
shouldn't have been offered. They had it. You should have been
They
offered
had it?
because you
when
took
have they
it.
Had, when did they
What do you
have
mean?
it?
What does that mean?
And where's this Palestinian word coming from? It doesn't exist.
They tell me that
Who are you
Palestinians don't
with?
have land, Palestinians don't exist. I am a Palestinian and I do exist.
Like I said, if there was if religion was not involved in this, there would be no point for any Jew to be standing on this ground.
Problem that causes war, in my opinion, is religion.
When you kill people because you want their
Death is
land
a
or you
horrible
don't
thing.
agree with
We
their
want their
opinion,
land.
they are all civilians. They have
They
no
have-
guns. They are not allowed to have an army. And unfortunately, the people who do
What do you mean
terrible
they've
things
guns?
over here are wrong. They're
You are very
wrong.
correct. Have you ever,
Who
in
blew
Hebrew,
up?
in
You
Hebrew
cannot
there is a term called
punish an
Ube'arta
entire
hara mikarbecha.
society.
I've born here. You, according to your accent, never mind when you are a newcomer. So I don't say I have more rights than you, but I have at least as you. I want to live here. So God is not in my picture. Let's start with that. Second thing, let's say that you're right with your claims. Okay, what is your solution? What is your solution for 1.2 or 3 million people?
Excellent question.
So the thing is, I know people vote against, fine, but I want to hear the solution. Maybe I will be convinced.
I am set in my ways. I won't be changed.
I'm ready to consider that, but what you say, I'm stuck with my opinion, I never will be changed. Believe me, I live here more years than you, and probably according to your age, your father, to know the facts. How do you know?
My family's been here 300 years.
No,
Written
no,
documentation, 300
That's
years.
how you find out. Listen, one thing is, I tell you,
A history book is written by somebody else, though. A history book is also written.
We have a problem here. It's a real problem. This is a country, not a very big country, which two peoples fight for. Each of these peoples consider this country, all the country, as its exclusive homeland. They ignore the right of the other side. They deny the right of the other side. They deny even the real existence of the other side. Not very long ago, our Prime Minister Golda Meir said there is no such thing as the Palestinian people. And this is very deeply embedded in the consciousness of both sides. This is a fifth generation we are dealing with, the fifth generation born into this conflict. The whole mental world of this generation, on both sides, it's been formed by this war.
There are a lot of Israelis who are pushing this concept of transfer. You know, this is a Jewish state and all you Arabs, you can just go live somewhere else, and there's so many other Arab countries, so why don't you just go there? It's a very dangerous logic. I mean, what they're talking about is ethnic cleansing. I mean, imagine Mexico taking Texas and saying, oh, all you Americans, you have 49 other states to go to, there's only one Mexico, just give this to us and stop being so greedy. I think Texans would have a problem with that concept. I'm not from Libya or Lebanon or Saudi Arabia. I'm from Palestine. And my grandmother is from what is today Israel. And I shouldn't have to go somewhere else simply because Jews don't like my religion and therefore they don't want me in their country.
The Israeli society is right now in a terrible state of being apathetic as it's never been before. There is a terrible indifference in the Israeli society. For everything, by the way. Even for its own lives. You see, once when a bus was exploding, the whole state was shocked for days. Today, if you didn't know anybody there, 2-3 hours or 2-3 days later, you forgot it. We became apathetic. And I can tell you, like any parent know, that if your child is ill, God forbid, as long as it's crying, you don't have to worry. It becomes really serious when the baby becomes, or the child becomes apathetic. Then you have to rush him to the hospital because then it becomes serious. I think the Israeli society is now in this stage of being very sick, namely being very indifferent and apathetic to anybody, anything that is happening around it.
Is it good for Israelis in the 21st century to be the creator and the holder of the longest occupation in modern history, 37 years? This has become already the longest occupation in modern history.
Only when we get to the point where there is equal value to human life will the Palestinians begin to be recognized.
This conflict is not governed by the law. This conflict is governed by power. Who is able to force their will on the other?
Now, I don't say that Israel is not, and Israelis don't pay a price. They pay a very heavy and painful price. To send your children to school and not being sure if you will ever see them again, believe me, day after day, is a terrible experience for any human being. And the Israelis are paying an enormous price. but unfortunately or fortunately, it is much of a smaller price than the Palestinians are paying. Because we at least have our normal lives.
Right now the obstacle is an Israel that thinks that it can impose its own wishes, that it can have its cake and eat it too, that it can continue the occupation and still blame it on the Palestinian Authority, that it can have peace but keep the settlements.
One of the most important things for my mother to see was the house she grew up in. Fortunately, we were able to get in.
This is the first place I lived in with my grandmother, my grandfather, and my cousin and my mother. هذه داري. أنا عشت هون. I lived here in this house. Oh, I don't remember, it was so small. To me, this place was so large. It brings back so many memories. It was the happiest time of my life to be in that house. This little section here, that's where my mother's kitchen used to cook.
That look, just that?
Yeah, that little nook. She used to cook for us, right here in this nook. And this is where we ate. The dining room was here. And this used to be my grandmother and grandfather's bedroom. And this was my bedroom. I slept on this side. I had twin beds in this room. And my bed was here. I'm thinking how life used to be. Oh, simple. Nothing to worry about. Very simple life here.
Across the street from this house was the factory her father owned, and she wanted to see it.
I used to come and to see my father while they're working in the factory.
We didn't know who owned it now. Standing in front of the gate, Mom began telling stories.
The first time I took a sip of a cigarette, I got choked. And ever since, I never had a cigarette. And I never will.
It wasn't long before we discovered her father's brother still owned the building. My mother hadn't seen her cousin Shibli since she was 5. And we'd never met anyone on her father's side of the family.
Our fathers were brothers. And I lived with them for a little while.
Yeah.
How do you remember her when she was a child? Tell me about her.
Naughty girl.
He had turned the factory into offices for his import-export business and wanted to give us a tour. Then we met his family, and I learned where my weight problem and musical talents came from. So here we were, looking at photographs, talking about old times, and joking around, just like any American family. They were educated, musical, fluent in English, and welcomed us with open arms. But this is how things are different. The night before, the occupation had literally hit home, almost killing Shibli.
This is where the tear gas canister came in.
Tell me what happened.
My father was sitting here, having his dinner, and Ranji here was doing the dishes.
No, she was standing near the fridge.
She was standing near the fridge, and there were disturbances outside.
Why?
Because of Prisoners' Day. The Palestinians were protesting the continuous presence of Palestinians in Israeli jails. And the Israelis started firing tear gas on them. And one of the tear gas canisters came in, flew through the window. It had emptied its contents before it came into the house. And came straight through and a few centimeters above my father's head.
What's it like living with so much unrest? Are you scared? Are you frustrated?
No, we're not scared, but nothing can be perfect here in this part of the world. There's always something amiss.
Anything can happen. You can't really plan well ahead.
for the future. And you have to come to terms with this fact. Otherwise, you will never be able to live here, and there is no future for you if you continue to have the same attitudes as one has living in the States.
It's a good thing we got in that day, because when we went back 3 years later, Israel had confiscated the properties to continue the wall in Bethlehem.
They are making everything upside down over here. Now all those land, I heard they confiscate them, especially this land, which means a lot for me. It used to be my land. Yeah, go ahead. The fence which you could see over here, it's a way how to start to confiscate the land. They throw this fence and they keep it for a while, then after a while they move it another 10 meters more, and then at the end they put ordinary fence to close this area.
So you can't touch it. If they put this on your land?
I cannot touch it. I will be in big trouble. I might be arrested and put in prison. The only way is to go through the court. And if I have to go through the court, it costs a lot of money.
So now they're going to take this house?
This house is empty. They will take it for sure. This is where I was born.
This is where my mother was born.
Your mother also was born over here.
And this house over here also belongs to
the family, yeah.
To the family. Will they get this house too, you think?
They will get all this.
They're going to take this too. Can you leave Bethlehem?
No, we don't have any permissions. They stopped to give us permission. And every day, even if they issue for us permission, is for a short time. And whenever there's any problem, you are not allowed to cross. It depends about the mood of the soldier at the checkpoint. Sometimes he's in the mood, he'll let you to pass. Sometimes he's not in the mood, he'll tell you, no way, it's closed area.
Going to prison was a rite of passage in this part of the world. And Johnny's son Peter went to prison for 4 years for throwing stones at soldiers.
I went to prison because they said that I'm making demonstrations against the government. For the first month, they take you to investigation. Okay, they ask you questions, with whom you are working, which party you are belong to, who's your friends, all these questions, and they start hitting you and beating you in different ways.
Almost 28 days we don't know where he is. We ask them, they say go for Hebron, go here, go and there. We go and we didn't find anybody.
They beat you with the sticks, and sometimes they take out your clothes and they will let you stay in the rain without no clothes. Then one of the things also, they will hang you on the wall all the night. They put dirty things on your face. They keep you in a small room, dark room, for all the time, 1 meter square, and standing. You are not allowed to sit down.
And I think about him every minute, and I pray for him every minute. I ask God always to be with him and with all the prisoners. With him, difficult time I have.
The issue when it comes to torture is it's wrong, it's evil, it should not be practiced. If a person has committed a crime, he should be tried, but he should not be tortured. Whether you agree with his political views or you're opposed to his political views is irrelevant. Torture is evil.
People listen and they hear rubber bullets and they think they are something mild, but actually they are not. These are not rubber bullets at all. These are metallic bullets covered with a very thin piece of rubber. And they are very heavy, and when they hit somebody, especially in the head, they can be fatal. We call them the nightmare of the neurosurgeon, because when they hit somebody in the head, they establish a track in the brain, and the surgeon doesn't know what to do. If they try to get them out of the head, they could injure so many brain tissue, killing the patient, or they could leave them in the brain, and then each time the patient moves his or her head, this bullet, which is very heavy, will move with the head, injuring more brain tissue. So it's a death sentence each way. We have 100 children who lost their eyes because of these bullets, and we have many, many others who died because of the same bullets, who hit them in the head and ended up killing them.
Ironically, the people who have been most critical of Israel and most overt in their assessment of Israeli guilt and culpability are the Israelis within Israel, the Israeli thinkers and people of conscience, and of course, many Jewish writers in the States and in Europe. And even though many have been charged with being self-hating Jews.
What brought me here in the first place was an incident that I witnessed in the middle of Jerusalem. One morning, I went to a meeting, and all of a sudden, like not very far from me, on the other side of the road, I saw two border policemen pointing their guns to a young woman in a veil, and her stuff was all over on the floor, and they were demanding her to lift her top in order to prove that she's not wearing any explosive. Now, it was very clear that she wasn't because of two reasons. First of all, she was wearing, a simple top with, you could tell that there's no heavy jackets or anything underneath it but her vulnerable body. And the second reason or evidence to the fact that it was just, nothing but harassment was the fact that they weren't panicking, the soldiers. They didn't close the street. They didn't move the people away. People went by like they do here, between the soldiers and this woman. Cars went by, and I just stood there shocked because to all the Israelis around it looked very normal. Nobody said anything. And shocked because we're doing that, and I'm aware to the fact that I'm saying we. I'm part of it. I'm an Israeli. I'm very much an Israeli. And I shouted to them, "Stop it! You cannot do it!" And they then pointed their gun to me, and they said, "Do you have a problem with that?" And I said, "Yeah." And then they said, "Well, go away, you shouldn't be so ungrateful, we're doing our job, we're defending you, we are taking care of your safety, go away." And I tried some more with some other soldiers to convince those soldiers to let her go. Eventually, I went back to the scene. I just stood there, I had nothing more to say. I just stared. I gave them the most piercing look I could make, and eventually they let her go. And then a few days later, actually it was exactly 2 years ago, a few days later I got this brochure of Mahsom Watch with this eye on the head of this simple paper, and I knew that this is, that it just came together. I knew that this is what I need to do.
Michal is a volunteer for Mahsom Watch, an organization of Israeli women who oppose the occupation in the West Bank. She stands at checkpoints to make sure Palestinians are treated with basic human rights.
The occupation isolates and chokes off Palestinian people and Palestinian communities. Israel controls every single entrance and exit into the occupied Palestinian territories. Most people don't know that. Palestine, we don't have an airport, we don't have control of our own borders, of our own waters, of anything.
What has happened is that the entire population is now being punished. That we as a nation, as a people, who have been denied for tens of years our very lives and livelihoods, who have been demonized, who have been terrorized long before suicide bombings took place. The suicide bombings are terrible, and they have done great damage to our cause. But they are, I think, a cry of utter despair. These are people who have no longer anything to lose.
90% of the barriers and the checkpoints are not separating Palestinians from Israelis. It's separating Palestinians from Palestinians. This is a very good example. Checkpoint is between the village, Hawara, and the city, Nablus. Most of the services are in the city. In order to get the most basic services, shopping, hospital, any medical treatment, even if you need a root canal, it's not urgent, but you cannot get it in Hawara, you need to go to Nablus. And for every little moving from the village to the city, you need to have a permit.
They've been there, some of them, since 6 o'clock. There's rules that say they can't be there that long, but it's what, 9:30, 10 o'clock now. There's no shade, there's no water, there's no nothing for them, and they're helpless.
Those are people that are being detained here. Their IDs are taken for checking, It's either that they tried to bypass or they pushed in the line and didn't stand according to the orders, or that they looked suspicious to the soldiers, so their IDs are being taken for checking with the General Security Services.
So this is an emergency case. The patient has been transferred since 6:30 in the morning from Nablus Hospital because they don't have the care there. And since 6:30, it's now 11, he's been on checkpoints. 4 checkpoints, this is the 5th, and they've kept him here for 2.5 hours. He has very serious heart disease, he has very serious vascular disease. He is having serious occlusion of major arteries in his leg and his abdomen, and he has already developed the gangrene on his left foot. A patient could die. A patient with heart disease could die. A child with head trauma could simply die. A patient with even high fever and febrile convulsions could also die. If he's not immediately operated, he could lose not only his leg, but also his whole life. Get a permit? No, of course. How can you get a permit? Yesterday was a Saturday, it was a day off. When you have an emergency, would you take the patient to the hospital or go to get a permit? I mean, this is totally insane and crazy. Because of this kind of behavior, we had 92 people die at checkpoints. Some of them were patients with heart disease who had cardiac arrests and died at the checkpoints. Some of them were children who were having febrile convulsions without medical care, and they developed brain damage and they died. And 55 women had to give birth at checkpoints so far. 55 women, 1/3 of them lost their babies. It's totally unacceptable. This is inhuman. This is a violation of every aspect of human rights. This has nothing to do with security. This is a process of collective punishment against a whole population and against the most sacred aspect of any humanity work, which is the care for sick people, the care for old people, the care for children, the care for women who are in labor. This is totally unacceptable. The American taxpayers' money is the money that is funding the Israeli army, the Israeli occupation, the Israeli checkpoints that you saw today that was preventing a sick patient with very serious heart disease from getting to the hospital.
Collective punishment is wrong. And I don't care if a person is a suicide bomber. I'm against suicide bombings. But you don't go and punish his village. You don't go and punish his uncles. You don't go and punish his schoolmates. You don't go and punish his whole environment. That's collective punishment.
We're going to meet with a family and people that you shot and killed their friends last week. A bullet to the head. Do you know that with these kinds of operations? Okay? And you're continuing to do this, and you're putting 20,000 people under curfew that can't leave their homes. And now you don't want the journalists to see.
No,
and you're telling me you don't know. You don't tell me you don't know why you're doing this.
I know why you're doing this, but you cannot go inside.
You're doing your job. We are doing our job.
Everybody will.
But what is your job? What is your job? To continue to put people in prison like this?
Security Israel people.
This is not Israel.
Okay.
We can't get to him. He lives inside Batunia, and the Israeli military has declared Batunia a closed military zone. They have their soldiers at just about every entrance and exit into Batunia, though we'll try to find another way around. And all of the residents of Batunia, about 20,000 people, are locked in their homes with soldiers pointing guns at them if they dare exit. Unfortunately, it's not something new. It's part of the occupation and having absolutely no control over your life at all. You don't know if today you can get up and go to work, you can take your children to school, you don't know if you can go visit family for your life, and that's the system of occupation. It strips you of your dignity, no respect for human rights, and it is really the essence of what the Palestinian freedom struggle is about.
Israelis tell themselves, why should we deal with the Palestinians if the United States says you don't need to?
Because of our visit, my uncle had applied for a permit. He wanted to show us his country. This time he got lucky.
We want to this balcons here. You see?
Okay.
Yeah, let's go, continue. You think that is easy? No. From down to walk here?
No, I can't believe it. Can't even talk because my mouth is so dry. You got some suntan.
We are living in a paradise, believe me, but we need freedom. We are in a big prison with Israel. If you want to move, for example, Jerusalem is 10 minutes from Bethlehem. If you want to go to spend the night there, we can't dare to go there. We must have a permission. And to ask for permission, it will take you 3 days or 5 days to give you this permission just to go to
10 minutes.
To Jerusalem. In case if you have this permission, anything happen immediately. If you know that you are Arab, immediately will put you in prison. What kind of life this? You want to be free, enough. Because, you know, now in our present time, the war is finished. There is no war. The war is for the stupid people. The unintelligent people or the educated people now, they are looking to live together, to build themselves, to build the future for the new generation. This is what we are talking with the Israeli people. It's finished for war. No end for war with the Palestinian people, because the Palestinian people, they are not easy people. You will never let them knees to you. You must understand this and to live together in peace. They never ask for peace. They ask always for peace of land.
Oh, I'm not going.
My uncle was always a risk taker, and today was no different. So he broke into the most holy place on the Mount of Temptations.
اتفرج يا ليلى.
خلص يلا تعالوا.
انت تعالوا.
مرحبا. هيونا فوق. فوق روح كل امك هي. اسكتي.
Unbelievable. This is heaven.
والله unbelievable.
Close to heaven as I'm going to get.
شاكر الباب. ما هو باب بيسكر ويشغل. اوكي ابونا اوكي. Thank you very much. Sorry father and forget that. Thank you.
We pretended we didn't know you.
You're like Peter, you denied us 3 times.
Because I told you أني ممنوع عيب ما ردش علي.
That's right, you guys.
Step.
You denied us
3 times.
3 times on the Mount of Temptation.
My son is going to join the army next year. Those young people, the sons of my friends, the sons of my neighbor, they are doing terrible things while personally they are not terrible people. I know part of them. They are doing what they are doing because if by the age of 18 or 19 you are sent to govern another people, you are being said day and night that you are a superior person, and those Palestinians are even not human beings. They are something else because they don't treat them like human beings. And the only way to make those soldiers treat them like they treat is to tell them, they are not human beings. You can treat them like animals. And then even people with some conscience can do those terrible things, and they treat them like animals. And if you want proofs for it, go to one of the checkpoints and look how it looks. Not only what's happening there, look how dirty it is, look how it's always neglected. Why do you think it looks so ugly, the checkpoints? No water, no toilet, nothing of a human need. Because those are stations not for human beings. Those are checkpoints for something which is not a human being like us.
You can never deal with violence in bits and pieces. You can never be selective. You can never deal with Palestinian reactions and say this is the cause. You have to deal with the context. And you have to deal with the context of the violence and the brutality and the provocation of the occupation. You cannot corner a whole people, imprison them, drive them to desperation, and then blame them for lashing out. As though we are the ones who are the aggressors, as though we're the ones who resort to violence, and they completely removed from the picture the very fact of the occupation and the fact that these things are happening on our own land. We're not in Israel. We're not protesting in Israel. We're not shooting in Israel. We're not taking away their land, building settlements in Israel. Everything is happening on Palestinian land. The wall, this horrible wall, is being built on Palestinian land. The Palestinians are being killed in their own towns and villages and cities as a result of incursions, as a result of the shelling, as a result of missiles tearing their bodies to bits.
The Palestinians have never wavered for a moment from what they want. They believe that they, by giving up 78% of the historical land of Palestine, of the country which was called Palestine before 1948, by giving up 78%, which are now Israel, they have made a historic concession.
We didn't come to this realization overnight. We didn't come into it happily. This was a very painful and difficult compromise that the Palestinian people were willing to make.
Behind me, what you're seeing is the Israeli outpost of Givat Asaf. This is, in effect, a baby settlement. This is what they start out with. We are in the middle of occupied territory here north of Jerusalem. And as you'll see behind me, what they do is they start out with caravans. Now, this is an illegal outpost even by Israeli standards, and under the roadmap that was issued and supported by the United States, all Israeli outposts that were erected after March 2001 were supposed to be taken down. What's going to happen now is that more caravans come, then they hook it up to electricity, then they hook it up to an infrastructure. On top of the hill behind me, it's already getting the protection of the Israeli soldiers. So while the Israelis are supposed to be taking it down, they are in fact protecting it. It's illegal not only by international law, all the settlements are illegal under international law, but even this one's illegal under Israeli law. It wasn't even approved by the Israeli government.
When Israelis speak about compromise, they mean what we have got, we have got. That's finished, that's a fait accompli. Now let's talk about the rest of Palestine, the other 22%. The Palestinians are not ready for this. Now, when the two sides meet, completely ignorant of each other, completely living in completely different worlds, they cannot understand each other. The Israelis don't understand what the Palestinians want. They think the Palestinians are crazy, irrational, they're out to murder Jews. That's all they have in their head is to murder Jews. Because this is how the Israeli imagine the Palestinians. And the Palestinians think that there's no chance at all to achieve anything at all by peaceful means with the Israelis, because the Israelis want to take over the whole country.
President Bush decided to use the loan guarantees as a means of telling Israel that they cannot press ahead with the settlements, that they will deduct from the 10 billion loan guarantees whatever money Israel spends on settlements, knowing that they're not going to do that, they've never done that, and that Israel has never opened up its books to the U.S. or provided accountability accounts. So anyway, even having done that, this was seen as a major affront to Israel. Gradually, the language shifted. From being illegal, they became an obstacle to peace. From being an obstacle to peace, they became unfortunate. From being unfortunate, they became ill-timed, and they became inconvenient. And now they're somehow erased from the political jargon, from the political statements of the U.S. administration.
This is a very sad statement when the world's only superpower cannot even have its own policy in the Middle East, but must follow the lead of the Israeli right wing. Not even the Israeli people, not even look for the interests of Israel, but follow what the Israeli right-wing government seems to dictate.
As Americans go without health care and they starve in parts of the United States, we are giving away billions of dollars a year to be used to violate the rights of Palestinians. Who pays for all of these settlements that we visited today? Where does that money come from? Who pays for all of these tanks that we see? Israel is not such a rich nation. It relies on the American taxpayers. Palestinians in the West Bank are not allowed to drive yellow-plated cars. That's how the apartheid system, in effect, is enforced. They don't say no Arabs are allowed to be on the road. What they say is that only yellow-plated cars are allowed to be on the road, and no Arabs are allowed to drive yellow-plated cars. So it's never quite direct, but it's the same effect. Basically, in the occupied Palestinian territories, you have two different legal systems and you have two different sets of rights. Jews living in the occupied territories are given Israeli passports, are Israeli citizens, have full rights and privileges as Israeli citizens, including the right to freely travel, including the right to vote inside Israel, even though they are living in the occupied territories in violation of international law. By contrast, the Christian and Muslim indigenous population have no such rights. They are not Israeli citizens. They don't have the right to vote. They cannot freely travel. They don't have access to the Israeli legal system, only to the Israeli military courts. And therefore, you in effect have an apartheid system. Christians and Muslims subjugated to Israeli Jews. This is part of the overall strategy. Israel's strategy is to take as much Palestinian land as possible with as few Palestinians as possible. It is a Jewish state. I mean, they don't even try to pretend to be anything else. They say that openly. We're a Jewish state, but what they mean by that is we don't want Christians and Muslims in our state. Here you see the soldiers that are stopping all the Palestinian cars, but you see, we just drive right through because they think we are Israeli Jews, we are in an Israeli car. So we have no problem whatsoever. The indigenous population, the Christian and Muslim Palestinian population, has to go through this harassment every day. Could you imagine being in the United States and you're trying to commute, let's say, from Brooklyn to Manhattan, and they say, okay, Jews, you go right through, Christians and Muslims, you have to wait for hours on end, maybe you get through, maybe you don't, maybe you get to your job today, maybe you don't. Everyone in the world would say that's religious discrimination. And yet that's exactly what happens here in Israel, and nobody questions it. If you look behind me, you're going to see the Israeli settlement of Adam on the outskirts of Jerusalem. And you'll see that the settlements are very structured. They all have that sort of red roof architecture. But what you don't notice is that it's built on the village grounds of this village over here, this Palestinian town. And while the settlement, which is of course illegally here, and has, you know, full freedom of access, you can drive right in, you can drive right out, you can go into Jerusalem, you see this village is actually cordoned off by this fence and barbed wire so that the Palestinians are in effect caged off of what was originally their land. Now what's really interesting about this is that you see there's an olive grove right there on the left of the highway, there's an olive grove on the right, and you see that the way the Israelis built this road was to go right through the olive grove of this village. They simply took the land from the villagers, they took away their source of revenue. So not only are you taking their land, you're also forcibly impoverishing the local population. So this is the entrance to the Palestinian village that we were just looking at from the top of the bridge there. And this was the only way they could come in and out of their village. And since the uprising started about 3 years ago, you see that the Israelis have blocked the entrance so you can no longer drive in and out of this village. Now the sad part is that occasionally the only way to get out is that you'll see people walk through, and even old ladies who have to clamber over these rocks. And they have to come and wait here on the side of the road for the minibuses that you see, those yellow minibuses that are driving by, because those are the only Palestinian cars that are allowed on this road. What about services? You have to climb over these for whatever reason. You're having a heart attack in the middle of the night, the ambulance can come here, and then you've got to somehow, your family members have to carry you over those rocks in order to get to medical services. And it's a real problem because they're not allowed into Jerusalem either, and Jerusalem's one of those areas that has those hospitals that are specialized in kidney dialysis and cancer treatments that aren't available elsewhere in the occupied Palestinian territory. So if you can't get from this village to Jerusalem to take care of medical needs, you're going to die.
If you were living there in your own land, in your own home, and somebody comes and says, well, there's somebody who needs a home, so why don't you give away more than half of your home? And you can live in half of it. Is this something that anybody has the right to do?
Bereavement, trauma don't make people better. They scar them. And Israelis come from the trauma of Holocaust, the trauma of uprooting from Arab Islamic societies and transplanting to Israel, the trauma of perpetual warfare. My 8-year-old knows people who have been killed in the last year. Nobody is unaffected.
I mean, could you imagine the UN deciding today they're going to divide up the United States? How many Americans would accept that? So there's been a betrayal of the Palestinians on the international community from the very origins of Zionism, well through the partition plan of 1947, all the way up to the current day. And it's precisely that sense of abandonment that gives rise to the Palestinian extremists who say the rest of the world's going to sit by and watch as this happens to us, and therefore we have a right to defend ourselves any way we can. And we don't get Apache helicopter gunships and billions of dollars a year and F-16s from the Americans, so we're going to fight any way we can, even if that means using our own bodies as weapons.
When you kill off that hope that you have the ability to affect anything or to reach out to someone that might be able to do something, it creates a very dangerous equation here in which people feel like they're going to die anyway.
The accumulation of violations, the humiliations that you go through to obtain the different permits, the constant daily pressure on people here, I don't know of any place in the world where there is anything like that.
As I toured this amazing country with my family, I couldn't help but notice, even though they put on a happy face, they were all suffering from the effects of the occupation in Bethlehem and Jerusalem. It amazed me that they weren't seething with anger. Decades of indignity, immobility, and loss of life and property did not take away their determination to lead a normal life. And still, like any family in the world, we laughed.
He's 40 years old?
We reminisced.
Oh, this is Osa's father?
Yeah. And we ate.
It's rice with meat and nuts. You'll never see it again, Habibi.
And ate.
This is fat, Ted. This is fat.
And ate.
Like this?
Arabic bread.
Underneath it all, they were prisoners, 24 hours a day. The impact of the unrelenting and ever-strengthening occupation confined their lives.
It's a big prison for the people living inside.
Impeded by checkpoints, blocked by walls, those who could get permits were excited to show me the beauty of their country and were euphoric to pass a checkpoint.
This is the milk of life. It's Arak from Bethlehem.
They were resilient. Sadly, they had adapted to the unimaginable. Most Palestinians, like my family, are proud, generous people who admire Americans. But I couldn't stop asking myself, does Israel really believe they're winning? Filming this story, I realized so many Israelis don't even know or care what their government is doing. And those who do are marginalized. What if they all knew? Would things change?
So now we're just going to drive into the settlement of Adam. They're very well guarded and everything's made very convenient for them. It's all paid for by the state. Just come in. And that's it. So if we lived here, we get in very easily. As you see, ongoing construction, just to show you it's constant development, kids' playground. And this land all belongs to that Palestinian village over there. And I wouldn't be surprised if this wasn't more of their agricultural crops that they had here. And somehow we're supposed to believe that Israel's actually going to withdraw as they continue to build more and more. The sad part about all this is that the people who live here are not like bad people. Often they get a real bad rap in the United States. They're presented as these people who come out here to purposely steal land from the Palestinians and to oppress them. The majority of settlers are people like you and me who just simply want a good life, and the Israeli government uses them as political pawns in this game, and it incentivizes them to move into these settlements. It gives them housing subsidies, it gives them income tax benefits, it gives them nice neighborhoods, it gives them, garages and guards outside. if you ask the average settler here, do you think your presence here is hampering peace? They would say, no. What's the problem? I just want to live here. How can that hamper peace? And they just don't get it. They don't get it because they haven't been educated to get it.
In 1967, after Israel occupied the West Bank, which included East Jerusalem, Israel drew new boundaries for Jerusalem and annexed, in a somewhat artificial and random way, Palestinian villages, or even half of Palestinian villages, into the state of Israel. So now in the case of Abu Dis, half of Abu Dis is considered part of Israel under Israeli law, half of it is the West Bank. Although, of course, under international law, all of this is occupied territory. It was a very random line, and Palestinians went about their daily life without thinking about the municipal boundaries until Israel increasingly put restrictions on Palestinian movement. And the final and most drastic restriction, of course, is the building of this wall through the middle of a street along what Israel claims is the border between now Israel and the West Bank. The result is that you have 200,000 Palestinians inside the separation barrier, on the Israeli side, if you like, of the barrier, and 80,000 Palestinians just outside of the barrier in these Palestinian neighborhoods. More than separating Israelis and Palestinians, the barrier is separating Palestinians from Palestinians. I think there's no security logic here. It's purely political considerations. Israel can't claim that the Palestinians on this side are dangerous and the Palestinians on the other side are not dangerous.
I mean, the entire Arab world made an offer to Israel. Return the land in return for full and complete peace, the Beirut Initiative. And the Israeli says, no, we're not interested. We're simply not interested. International law has set certain limits. There is an international consensus of trading land for peace, that Israel should withdraw from the land in '67 in return for full and complete peace. Israel is not interested in these offers.
This is the border between Jerusalem and Bethlehem. And in back of me over here is the Jewish neighborhood settlement of Gilo. It was built on land that was owned by Palestinians, expropriated. There are now about 30,000 Israeli residents living there. And in the eyes of most Israelis, by the way, including myself, that's not a settlement, it's a neighborhood. Now over there is the city of Bethlehem, and opposite us, the Church of the Nativity. And this is the border between the two. Had we come here 2.5 years ago, we wouldn't be allowed to stand here because there was firing going back and forth between Bethlehem and Beit Jala and Gilo. If you'll notice, all of the windows over here are made with bulletproof reinforced glass. What's the significance of all of this? It's very simple. There may be injustice in the establishment of Gilo, but there's critical mass in the neighborhoods of East Jerusalem. Now, you can see they're working on it as we stand here, but they stopped over here right in back of us. Why? Well, it's very simple. If we were only interested, Israelis, in protecting ourselves, we'd continue along the ridge here and we would be able to seal Jerusalem from potential terrorists. And there have been terrorists who have come here, but we stopped here. And you know why we stopped here? Because we're not going to continue along the ridge. We're going to plunge down into the valley over here, climb up the mountain opposite us, and cut deep into the West Bank. Now, we haven't done that yet because of the international pressure, and we're waiting for the right moment and things of that nature. The right-wing narrative here would be, this land is my land, this land is my land, a rather troublesome variation on Woody Guthrie. It's also a belief that there's one collective, a Jewish collective, the Israelis, to the west of the Jordan River, and the Palestinians aren't a people, but at best a gaggle of individuals. That there is no solution to this conflict except by means of force and a decisive military victory. That there is no possibility of achieving a political agreement with the Palestinians. And therefore, we are going to dominate the entire public domain to the west of the Jordan River, in Israel proper and in large parts of the West Bank, with small enclaves, Bantustans, etc. I will take you next to the Palestinian neighborhood of Silwan, which is the precise opposite of this, where there's an attempt to turn a Palestinian neighborhood into an Israeli one. It's an attempt that's doomed to failure. You know what's being done here? This family over here has lost their home, so they have to move somewhere else, but there's no water. So they are building their own pipeline in the road here because the settlers took over their house. They're taking over houses with armed guards, stealing people's homes. Now, you notice here that there are two security guards. These are private security guards. They work for a private company called Modin Ezrachi, and the Israeli taxpayer pays 27 million shekel a year to guard over people like this inside Palestinian neighborhoods. Now, you can see what the neighborhood's like. I mean, the kids here. He lives in this building, and they were renovating it, and the settlers came in, broke down the door, and claimed that they had bought the house. And since then, it's only been 2.5 weeks or so, they have no life. I mean, the settlers come here, and they're dancing and singing, and this undermines the stability of Jerusalem. Since the 11th century, Christians, Muslims, and Jews lived in their own quarters. We don't get into each other's bones. That's the pattern of life. And this threatens to Hebronize the city of Jerusalem, to make coexistence impossible in the city. I can get along with this kid because he lives in his neighborhood, I live in mine, and we can meet in neutral places and we can get on fine. But the minute that we begin to undermine, the settlers here want to turn this into a predominantly, if not exclusively, Jewish city. All of this area is Palestinian. And you have here 3 Israelis, a number of families in the next building. What this will do, it threatens to blow up the city. This is pyromania.
Palestinians have had a very hard time accepting the legitimacy of a movement that brings Jews from all over the world, puts it in our land, in our homes, and kicks us out. It's hard for us to accept it. It's hard for secular Palestinians like myself to accept the concept of a Jewish state based on ethnicity and religion, when I believe that the state should be for everybody.
You see that house at the end there? This is where I used to live. But now the wall is going to be there, splitting that area from here. And splitting is the same residential area, making the same family, a part of the family behind the wall and the other part in the wall. Now, where I live here we can reach our schools, we can reach doctors, we can reach whatever facilities we have here, but behind the wall there, they don't have any facilities, any services. They can, if you want a doctor at night, they can't go straight away. This I'm talking after building this wall, which already started. You can see the blocks in the street where the wall is going to be. I'm thinking that life will be impossible if this wall is erected there 8 meters high. Then everything is ruined. I mean, as far as social life, children, fathers, grandchildren, nobody can see each other. On the other hand, no services, which is the most important for living. This is it.
And your son's going to be on the other side of that wall.
Oh yes, they will be on the other side of the wall, and it's not. I'm not talking about myself. Everyone will be affected. 50,000 or 70,000 people are going to be apart. This is it.
How do you deal with it? Do you get frustrated? Do you get angry?
Well, of course. How do you think that we are happy to wait and see these things happen? We are angry. We cannot. I cannot express myself how bad the situation will be if this happens really.
When my uncle described how the wall would soon divide his family and his life, our Israeli crew became very defensive.
I can understand the frustration and the frustration and anger in the Palestinian side regarding the growing of the settlements and regarding the measurement that the army took. And I can understand that frustration led to a burst of rage. But on the other end, this burst of rage 3 years later only led Palestinians to a worse position.
I am from Jerusalem. I have the same ID like what you have, Jerusalemite. Right. My roots are from Jerusalem. My grandfathers are from Jerusalem.
I was first, my house where originally I was born is taken now. Israelis are living there, and I pass every day from in front of that house. It's okay, we just forget what happened in 1948. Now we are living here. I have the same ID you have, but it says I am an Arab, Israeli Arab. Yours, maybe it says Israeli. And this is a cause for the soldiers to let me wait hours and hours on checkpoints, while if you are passing at the same time, you just pass in a minute without any delay. So in my passport, I don't have my passport even. If we want to travel, we have the laissez-passer. So why this against the same Jerusalemite? I am Jerusalemite and you are Jerusalemite. Why these distinctions between both of us? This creates a bad feeling. I feel bad because when I see we are going together in two cars, you just pass and I have to wait 2 hours there. Israel is the strong and Palestinians are the strong. The strength can impose peace. Can impose peace if they want. If there is.
How can we impose peace? How can we impose peace?
It is simple. So
how can we impose peace if we say tomorrow, okay, tomorrow there is peace, no borders anymore, everything fine, and then when Hamas guy comes with a bomb and explodes, everybody says this is a peace. This is what kind of peace is this? How can we impose peace?
Before 3 years we were living in peace. We lived in peace from 67 relatively
right.
till that period, till the decision was made to take over more lands and put the wall where it is not in place, and this created all the problems. Now, if somebody comes and takes your house, okay, the first time. The second time takes your business, hotel. Now, I'll show you that the hotel where we live from is taken by soldiers 3.5 years and without any compensation. What can we do? I mean, other than complaining, other than explaining things. So it's part of my childhood, this road where we are driving now, until I will show you my house before 1948. We came here, leaving, of course, everything, all the furniture in the house and everything. We came to the old city, and that was the end. We couldn't return. This is the house where I was born in. It's our house before 1948, and this is really where we had our childhood dream.
You ever stopped here before and walked around?
No, this is the first time since 56 years, the first time I stop and look around here. You imagine, well, you cannot think of what I am now thinking. I remember my childhood, but I'm sorry, I don't know what's in. Where is my bed? Where is my toys? They were in. I just remember these things only as in clouds and not reality. So I feel now I'm feeling really emotions comes back to my thinking how I used to spend my life sitting on this edge watching the cars going and passing by, but no more. This is only in the past like a dream, a bad dream. But we cannot ever forget this dream. It's kept in our mind because we never were able to come back to the house. We are upset always. We cannot understand why these things are done to us, and this is how we feel, bad. I mean, and it can't go on and on the same way.
During our filming, we experienced frequent delays at checkpoints. It really made me furious that they stopped Americans. We pay for everything they have. Today again, waiting hours in the hot sun at the Bethlehem checkpoint. Another small taste of the 57 years of punishment and frustration.
This is the hotel in front of us. You see where you can see some cement blocks. The Bethlehem Inn, of course, we invested in this hotel, renovated the hotel 3 years ago, 3.5 years. You can see the windows, broken glass and these things. It is occupied by the soldiers until now. And of course, we have a case in the court. It went through all the 3 years. We have our next session is on the 15th of May. We hope that we can arrange some compensation or something like that. But so far, we cannot enter and we cannot see anything inside.
And they set it on fire? It went on
Yes,
fire?
it went 2 floors up. You can see that it's black smoke. It went under fire. 2 floors were destroyed completely.
And you just finished it? You just finished
Yeah, it
remodeling?
was the renovations just finished a month before the occupation. It was.
What do you want to scream? Do you want to yell? Do you want to, I mean, what do you think?
No, I think we have to obtain our rights, compensation. At least they should leave the hotel, and we want to work because 20 employees were living out of this place, and now 20 families. This means we have to go. We need the compensation to renovate, to, you know, the destruction to.
Do you think you'll ever see the compensation?
I hope yes.
We are in one of the largest settlements in the West Bank. It's called Ma'ale Adumim. If you look at it from a purely objective, non-political perspective, it actually looks like a nice community. Like I could, you know, be perfectly happy living over here. I mean, look at the palm trees, look at the flowers. If you take a look down here, you've got a pool, and you've got an indoor pool and you've got an outdoor pool, and you see that the entire community is actually very prosperous and it's very well manicured. And some of the Arab villages nearby, of course, don't even have running water or electricity. So you see how lots of the natural resources are taken for the Israeli settlers. They have plenty of water, they can shower every day, they have plenty of drinking water, they can water their lawns, and yet the people on whose land this was built don't have those basic resources. It's all part of a strategy. Attract Jews in, push Arabs out, make life so difficult for these Christians and Muslims that they eventually leave. And then you have your Jewish state on all of the land. It keeps on going because nobody stops them. You know, what are the Palestinians supposed to do? We don't have the ability to stop Israel from doing this. It's a power dynamic. That's what it means to be under occupation, is you have no power. Israel has all the power, and that's why it can do whatever it wants. And that's why we have the violence that we have, because many Palestinians feel that's the only weapon that they have. If the international community finally did what it's supposed to do in stopping Israel from building settlements, from violating human rights, from violating the Fort Geneva Convention, we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in today.
It's some irony of the situation. You have maybe more journalists here than any other place in the world. You have more international aid organizations and diplomats than any other place in the world, and yet all of that involvement is not resulting in a greater respect for human rights.
So we're leaving Ma'ale Adumim, and all we're going to do is going to go around the circle, and we're going to end up in Abu Dis, one of the Palestinian neighborhoods in East Jerusalem. And it really is like going from one country to another. Even the road that we're on, you know, is not paved well. You'll see a lot of the signs are both in Hebrew and in Arabic, because this was, you know, sort of an integral part of Jerusalem. A lot of Jews would come here to do their shopping, and so you'll see the signs are in Hebrew and in Arabic. It was one of those areas where coexistence was quite visible. People would shop together, talk together. Probably many of the people here speak Hebrew, but they didn't coexist as equals. The people who live here do not have Israeli passports. They are not Israeli citizens because they're Christians and Muslims. This is it. This is the wall in Abu Dis. You know, the Israelis call this a fence, but it's about 8 meters high, solid concrete. And the wall basically comes right through the center of the town. I mean, there are shops on the other side, there are houses on the other side. I mean, imagine if you woke up one day and between you and the 7-Eleven down the street, there's this huge monstrosity, this wall of 8 meters of concrete. That's basically what happened here.
Qalqilia is a Palestinian village. About 41,000 people live there.
Ahlan.
It's completely cut off by the wall. There is only one exit. And for the security of Israel, the center of commerce was bulldozed, too close to the wall. Qalqilia has rich agricultural land and one of the largest aquifers in the region. It's on the Israeli side now. Farmer Sharif Omar has lived there all his life.
How much land did you have before the wall?
19 dunums in this side, 175 in the other side. But those 19 dunums here are nothing. You know why? Because all our underground water wells are in the other side. This is a problem. We haven't water to drink here. We haven't electricity from outside JUs. We have the motors only.
But don't you pay taxes? Don't you pay for electric?
We pay everything. We pay everything. But if we pay everything, this doesn't mean that we have everything. We have to pay, but not to have. Everything here is from the land.
Is that how you live? Everything comes from the land?
Yes. Everything I wanted, I have to plant it and to have it from the land. Because of this, we find it so difficult for us if the Israelis will deprive us of this rights to go to the land.
What's growing now?
Vegetables, you mean? Or vegetables, up to now, I didn't begin because I was forbidden to go there. From 7 November until 10 days ago, I was unallowed to go through the gate because I haven't a permit. In look what season this time, these weeks, I need daily from 7 to 8 workers. But today I have only 3 because we haven't permits. And those workers can't have the permits because they don't own the land. If you can't prove with the landowner document that you have a land, you will never have a permit. But we need the workers. How to do? I don't know. So if I have 175 dunums, maybe I will take care for 10 dunums maximum, me and my wife. This means one thing. They want us to immigrate. They want us to find the new sources. And you know we are not welcomed in the Arabian States. I'm sorry to say that. And the world is not welcomed for new refugees. They don't want any new refugees. Enough for them. When I went to Europe and I see how we can go with the car 2 hours and 3 hours without checkpoints, without barriers, I was astonished. Why for us we can't do that? Why?
If you can't work the land and you can't make a living and you can't go anywhere, then what do you do?
I must be patient. I will never get out of my village. This is a promise.
So then what do you do? Patient? How patient can you be?
Okay, up to now, I lead demonstrations in JUs, peaceful demonstrations, up to this moment. But who knows in the future what to do, what to be? I don't know. But up to now, I prefer to lead peaceful demonstrations, peaceful resistance, up to now, up to this moment. And I began to receive a lot of Israelis, those who support peace inside the Israeli society. And they began to understand our problem. They began to support us. They began to participate as our demonstrations. This is good. I hope one day they will be the majority.
You know, we learned from you Americans that good fences make good neighborhoods. And I always say, it's okay to build a fence between me and you, my neighbor. But would any American ever consider to build this fence in the living room of the neighbor? Does it make sense that I will come to you, my neighbor, and say, let's build a fence between us to have better neighborhood, and then I will build it in your bedroom? And that's what Israel is doing. Israel wants a fence, fine with me. Israel believes that it will protect it from terror, fine with me. But put it in the right place. Don't create a new injustice. You created so many injustices in the last 37 years and the last 3.5 years mainly. We need also this fence. Why couldn't it be on the green line? If it comes to protect us Israelis, why should it be on vineyards and houses, cutting villages, cutting peasants from their fields, cutting relatives from their relatives? What is it? Not even considering that there are people living there where we cut their life, people who went through so many terrible things in the last years. So now we have also to cut their lives? Are we the only one around? Don't we see there is another people suffering next by to us, with whom we at least pretend that we say that we want peace with? That's a way to build peace, to build confidence, to build friendship, with this fence, cutting their lives. So if Israel would have been honest about really looking for protection from terror, this fence should have been built on the green line, and I can assure you that no Palestinian and nobody in the world would criticize Israel. You see, Israel had built a fence around Gaza, which is quite efficient, I must say. Nobody said a word. There are problems about it, but nobody said a word about the right of Israel to build a fence, because you know why? Because the fence was built in the right place, on the border of Gaza.
The wall is the symbol, is the real representation of everything that the occupation stands for. Land theft, confiscation of water, total human deprivation for the Palestinians, imprisonment of the Palestinians, a racist system, and full impunity. This is what the wall stands for. You're imprisoning your victims because you want them to behave like good little victims, and in the process, you are stealing their land and stealing their water and creating tremendous human suffering and deprivation.
A state that defines itself in terms of one ethnicity or religion, whether it be a Jewish state or whether it be a Palestinian Arab state, is not a state in this part of the world that can be based on justice. The populations are simply too mixed. You cannot unscramble an egg. And the only just resolution to this conflict, I firmly believe, is one state for everybody, Jews, Christians, Muslims. It is no longer a Jewish state or an Arab state. It is the state of its citizens. It is the state of the people who live here, like every other democracy in the world. This already is one state. It's the same highway infrastructure, the same international borders, the same electricity grid, the same water resources. But it's one state in which 3 million Christians and Muslims are denied equal rights, including the right to vote.
And if you put together Israelis and Palestinians with the same cultural, socio-economical background, you'll be surprised how much common language they will find, like nothing.
Hundreds of organizations are working for peace. Photography programs that show both sides how human we all are.
We think, I have Arab friends, so maybe I'm doing something wrong. But I'm sure that something in their heart makes them to understand not to shoot so fast.
The family circle. Each has lost someone they know to the other side. They're willing to meet and forgive and move on.
The pain of losing our beloved ones, and we share the same hope. And there is nothing more that I need than hope.
Israelis who would rather go to prison than join the army.
The problem is that we see no future to this place, and this is what brought my son to refuse.
And international groups and individuals that stand in the line of fire for justice. These voices are not heard, even though they're screaming. The Palestinians are fighting for their rights and freedom, not terrorists. The facts outweigh any question.
You cannot really make peace with somebody you ignore. Especially in Arab culture is different from European culture and American culture. In Arab culture, personal contact is extremely important. It's very important to have physical contact, to speak to each other, to be polite to each other. There's a lot of politeness.
The U.S., by aligning itself with Israel, by siding with Israel so blindly, by being subservient to Israel, considering Israel, of course, as a domestic issue and a decisive factor in campaigns and political careers and so on. By doing that, they've subverted their own interests. They've undermined the standing of the U.S. in the world, not just in the region. They've fed extremism. They've fed fundamentalism. They've generated violence and instability throughout the world and probably contributed to greater terrorism.
My kids are not secure because there is no political horizon. And if there were a political horizon, they would be more secure. And this administration has clearly absolved Israel from the responsibility of engaging in that. That doesn't mean that the Palestinians are blameless, far from it. But it does mean that there are not two problematic national leaders in this regard, there are three.
We need some kind of formula by outsiders to force both of us pig-headed people to come to some kind of reasonable solution.
The truth is, we don't mourn the loss of Palestinian lives. I think America has reached the stage of apathy too. We barely pause to remember the families who were wiped out, the homes and the schools methodically blown up, the hospitals and ambulances targeted, or the countless innocent people murdered every day while simply trying to live their lives. We had one last stop to make. The grave of my mother's mother and her brother.
يا ريتك كنت معنا.
I'm proud to be a Palestinian. It's a beautiful culture. They are welcoming, generous, and polite, despite the dire circumstances they face every day. There is a saying that Palestinians are like the prickly pear. The plant cannot be killed. If you dig it up, it comes back. If you mow it over, it comes back. You can leave it without water, and it will still come back. Peace in the West Bank, Gaza, and Israel is in the interest of the entire world. What is the world waiting for? It is time for the occupation to end. We must be patient. We get used to it were phrases that came up over and over. I ask you, how long must they be patient?